Right, Carlton King is a former Scotland Yard Special Branch and MI6 officer and the author of Black Ops.
I was undercover for Special Branch in a jihadi organisation. My name is Carlton King, and welcome to the Black Spy Podcast, the show that shines a light on the world of secret intelligence, national security, and armed governmental personal protection operations. But what we really look at is we look at the world of geopolitics in the round. And that basically means that we look at both the macro and the micro, and we look at how the world affects you as an individual listening to it, and how the leaders orientate you towards various perspectives. Now, this week's Black Spy podcast is basically called Validated, because what I'm actually saying is that over the years that I've been doing the Black Spy podcast, we have validated in time what we've said throughout many of the programs that we've provided to you, many of the podcast episodes we've provided to you. I mean, if you go back to the early days of the Black Spy podcast, and when I was working, I think, solely on YouTube at the time, you will see that this was around the time, in fact, before the Brexit vote in the United Kingdom. And I basically did a 20-minute view prior to Brexit about how I saw Brexit running. First and foremost, and I'll do ticks as to when we got it right. So first and foremost, I said that basically the Brexit vote would be a vote to leave the European Union. Tick. I said that would happen. Other people were saying it wouldn't. I said, tick, we will leave the European Union. And then I went into the reasons why this was an absolutely negative and incorrect perspective. And I'll tick off what I said at the time, and I'll orientate it to what people were saying, particularly people like Farage or like the then Prime Minister, not the Prime Minister in waiting, Johnson, etc. And I'll state where we were right. So, example, the common travel area. For people who don't know what the common travel area is, between the United Kingdom, which is Northern Ireland, Great Britain, which is Scotland, Wales, and England, there's a common travel area, and that common travel area means that people in the Republic of Ireland, which is south of Northern Ireland, have free access between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. And that's what people think it is, but it isn't. It goes a step further. Those in the Channel Islands, Guernsey, Jersey, etc., have free access as well into Great Britain just by travelling there. There is no requirement for a passport or anything like that. It's perceived as part of Great Britain for that. And so is, this is the thing that people don't understand, and so is the Republic of Ireland. So that means once you come into the Republic of Ireland, you then have free access into the rest, into Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Now, recently people have spoken about, there's illegal immigrants coming across the border from the Republic of Ireland into Northern Ireland. Let me explain to you, ladies and gentlemen, that's free movement of any person that you might so-called see as an illegal immigrant, somebody who doesn't have a right to be in the United Kingdom. That's free movement of that person from the Republic into any part of Great Britain. So if you land in, let's argue, in Cork, and you've got an absolute right to be in Cork because under the European Union regulations, you can travel into any of the European Union areas and you've got this authority to do that. Or you haven't, and you've moved from Germany and then you've moved into the Republic of Ireland without being stopped because there's no border controls. You then have the absolute right to get on a plane, get on a boat, whichever way you want to do it, into Holyhead, or get on a plane and fly into Heathrow or any British airport that does a connection between the Republic of Ireland and the United Kingdom, and you will not be checked in terms of looking for your passport, because there isn't any check for you looking for your passport, because it's a common travel area. So that's one great area where you can come into Great Britain. Now, I mentioned this back in 2015, 2016, that this would be a route in, once we left the European Union, for anybody who wishes just to come into Great Britain. No problem whatsoever. And of course, I'm not saying it was because I said it, but you had people like Johnson saying, we'll control that by having some controls on the system. Well, you won't have any controls, because you want to keep open the route between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. And if you want to keep that route, which is known as a common travel area, along with the other common travel area routes, there will be no controls. So that will be used by any person who so wishes to travel into Great Britain. Forget the boats. You don't need the boats. You just come in via that route. Tick. So I was right there. And that's been done more and more and more. I also said for the average Briton, it would be more costly for them. When they went on holiday, they'd have to then have controls coming through into the European Union or any European Union country. Tick. I said there'd be, in latter stages, the European Union will get its act together and it will check Britons coming into the European Union. But I also said in the opposite direction, there won't be proper, definitely not customs checks, because they don't have the numbers. You may well see the case that the immigration, which is now part of the border force, checks your passport. But what you won't have is proper controls on goods coming in and out of the United Kingdom, pure and simple because we just won't have the numbers and we won't put the money in to get the numbers. But you will in the other direction, because the European Union will put the numbers there, and the European Union will. And now you see it. You see that there's massive lines of traffic waiting to get through from Dover to Calais, etc., etc., etc. Purely and simply because the European Union is stopping people. And of course, the new systems come out now where they're fingerprinting everybody, so they know exactly who they're getting into the European Union. And it's causing massive delays. And at airports, it's causing massive delays at airports. And of course, people with spouses from the Republic of Ireland, or who can claim, in fact, even Northern Ireland heritage, can have an Irish passport. And because of that, wives or husbands who happen to have Irish heritage can just walk through into the European Union. So to all of the countries which we love going on holiday to, from Spain to Italy to France to Cyprus to wherever, and you know, the British spouse is waiting there in line. Well, actually, what he really should do is go with, or she should do, is go with their other spouse and say, I'm with the spouse. But the vast majority of people don't understand that, so they don't do it, so they're waiting. Then you've got the issue, tick, by the way, then you've got the issue of mobile phone roaming. I said that would change. The propaganda at the time was, no, it wouldn't change, we'd come to some agreement. Now, for the vast majorities of companies, it has changed, and you pay a surcharge to use your phone within the European Union. Tick. Then I also said the amount of alcohol, etc., you could bring through will be also limited. Foods that you used to just bring across will be limited. Tick. Has happened. I also said that one would have the problem with Britons living abroad in the European Union countries who didn't get their act together and didn't get residency in those countries, or couldn't get residency in those countries due to the fact that they had, say, a criminal record, or they just didn't have enough monies in the bank or whatever, that would be a massive problem for Britons, particularly not in the other direction. Tick. And it has become a problem. And many a Briton is now having to leave Spain, France, Italy, Cyprus, because they don't have the correct information. Or, which is actually what's really happening with the vast majority of them, what happens is that these people stay illegally, let me say it again, that these people stay illegally in France, in Italy, in Spain, in Portugal, etc., etc. So they are illegal immigrants. Now, ladies and gentlemen, don't think that the only illegal immigrants are non-Brits. There are many an illegal immigrants sitting in European Union who are British, who do not have the wherewithal to come back to the United Kingdom because they've got nothing. They spent a lot of their money on getting to the European Union country in which they were in, and now they don't have the money to come back. And if they bought a property in many European Union countries, when they bought it, it was a great deal for them, but those properties have not risen like the British property would have risen, and therefore they can't get back on the property ladder in the United Kingdom. So they then have a problem, and they can't make their way back. Tick. They can't get the healthcare they used to get because under the European Union system, the EHIC card allowed them free general healthcare. Now, supposedly trying to be clever again and fool the public. And the problem with Britain is that Britons are not particularly good. In fact, I would argue, are particularly poor at politics because they don't involve themselves in politics as a general rule. The average Brit doesn't want to, so he votes once every 5 years to get the party in, if that, he or she. The party comes in, and after that they don't do anything again. And to be fair, the politician don't want to do anything either. It's happy for that one vote that gets you in power, and then thereafter you don't want to ask the public any questions. If you don't believe me, look at how British democracy works. And probably most people listening to this actually understand politics and have some political acumen and understand that that's the case for the average Briton. But the point I'm making is, and the reason why I'm mentioning this, is that what Johnson did, he said, we won't bother with this EHIC card, it's rubbish, because he couldn't bother with the EHIC card because they were no longer part of the European Union. We'll make a global healthcare card. Well, that global healthcare card gives you no rights whatsoever in practically everywhere in the globe, including the European Union. But it just says a global card. And what you're supposed to do is pay for whatever treatment you've had and then try and claim it back from the NHS when you get back into Britain. That's not how the EHIC card worked. The EHIC card worked where you went and got your healthcare. It was all sorted out for you. And the country in which you had the healthcare was then meant to claim it back pro rata within the European Union system as to the healthcare that you had achieved and taken. Emergency healthcare it was meant to be, obviously, at that particular time. But most countries went above and beyond emergency healthcare because you're a European Union citizen. So now, of course, that isn't given to anybody. Tick. As I said, it wouldn't be. And so for a lot of Britons now who didn't get their residency or haven't gone for their residency, didn't understand they needed residency, then looking for healthcare, can't get it. So what do they have to do? Return back to the United Kingdom with no money, with no possibility. And sometimes even the National Health Service says you've been away for too long, so we're not putting you automatically onto the National Health Service. You're going to have to pay for some of it. Tick, as I said, would happen. So you've got all these problems. In the opposite direction, you had a whole host of European Union citizens who were working in Great Britain, and these citizens now, because they felt as though they were being treated badly, they left Great Britain. And therefore, I said it at the time, what will happen is that you will have to bring in more immigration from Africa and Asia, because European Union immigration, the people will return back to their European Union country or to one of the other European Union countries. They've got loads to choose from. They can go to Germany, they can go to France, they can go to Italy, they can go to Poland, they can go wherever they want to go within the European Union and live wherever they want to live, or to Spain and live wherever they want to live in the European Union. They've got that right. We don't, because we're not part of the European Union. So what would happen is that European Union individuals would leave Britain, who felt that they were being undermined by the British, leave Britain and go and work in any of the other European Union countries. And therefore we would then need to bring people to Britain from elsewhere. And that's why we had an increase in immigration from Africa and Asia. And I said we would. Tick. And people don't like it. Now, I said it not because it's a negative that people would come from Africa and Asia. I said it because actually what would be happening is, particularly in the case of some of the African and Asian countries with a lower GDP, that we would be stealing from them their trained individual, their trained nurses, their trained doctors, their trained engineers, their trained, who we'd be trying to bring to Britain. And I felt that was a negative thing. So that's why I mentioned it at the time. And lo and behold, what's happened? Tick. That's exactly what's happened. People have left. So then we look at the next one. Those high wage earning individuals in the city who were European Union. In order to keep them, in order to make the connection with the European Union and ease of travel for high executives, we have paid them more money to stay in the United Kingdom. So they've been paid more money to stay in the United Kingdom. But the other side to that coin is less and less Brits have been given the opportunity to get those higher ranking jobs for the pure and simple reason, if a Briton gets it, he then needs to get a visa. The company needs to pay for their visa to go to some part of Britain, some part of the European Union. When actually what you do, if you get a European Union person on a high salary, he only needs to get the visa to come to Britain, the works visa for Britain. The rest of it, when he travels to the European Union countries, which, large companies have, they've got affiliates all around Europe because of the way it was set up when we were part of the European Union. They only need one visa. They don't need to get visas for a whole host of other countries or European Union general visa. They just need the one. So therefore, why wouldn't you hire an English-speaking European Union high-ranking person than hiring a Brit who can only speak English as a general rule and would then need visas, etc., to go to other parts of the European Union when they're required? So, as I said, Brits would lose out. Tick. Then the other one, the opposite side of that, from the high-ranking individual who was making money to the lower-ranking individual who was making money by his wit. So the van driver who was making sure that he was travelling to different parts of the European Union when we were part of it, picking up goods and bringing it back into Britain, or vice versa, from Britain into the European Union to do just-in-time work. All that is gone. That white van man driver is no longer getting to the European Union just in time because he's got to go through customs, immigration, blah, 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 blah. So therefore his business has gone. And you also find it with Britons who were making music or film or these industries which Britain actually was very good at. Number one, because of the English language, but number two, because we've put a lot of effort into that, into music, etc., etc. Now they're struggling to work in Europe because they need visas for everywhere where they need to go. And therefore, it's a works visa, so it's costing. That's added to the cost. The people who transport all their equipment, they can't get it. So what happens is you find a Dutch company picks up the gear and moves the gear around, and the British company's out of business, as I said it would be. Tick. We've had people who in fishing area, particularly crustaceans, who we don't eat them here, but they're eaten a lot in the European Union. So therefore, they're shipped. Let's say shrimp or something is taken off the coast of Scotland and then in the past easily passed into the rest of the European Union. Now you've got to go through customs duty, and now you've got a customs and duty problem. Again, big problem. So they've lost money, as I said they would, and those businesses are falling foul. Tick. So, I mean, I could go on and on with the European Union where we went out, but just to say, this is one of the areas which we've been vindicated in. I won't play you any clips on that because everybody knows what I'm saying is true and it is as it was. But I will play you some clips as it relates to other issues which we looked at and said would be a problem for us and is a problem for us, which we first brought on the Black Spy podcast and others tended not to believe us. So, example, one of those big areas was that we looked at in the Black Spy podcast and actually cost us quite a bit in terms of our show's presence on YouTube because we were banned from it for it's meant to be a couple of weeks, but it ended up as months because we spoke out and we spoke about the vaccine of relating to COVID-19. And we spoke about Dr. Fauci, and we spoke about that the Americans had actually were the ones that passed over the for gain of function work, as it's known, to testing it as a weapon and as a utility, that we looked at it in terms of how that how COVID-19 as a virus got out, and we said that the United States had a lot to do with it, that the government of the United States worked under Dr. Fauci, was involved in the experimentations in Wuhan, And of course, that wasn't something that people wanted to hear. So as I said, we got banned for it. Now, just yesterday, whilst I'm recording this, we've had the Director of National Security of the United States. So for those who don't understand what that is, for National Intelligence, sorry, DNI. For those who don't understand what that is, it's Tulsi Gabbard. She was given the post under Trump. She's resigned, her last day being yesterday, and now on her last day, she's put out information relating to COVID-19 and relating to the problems of what had gone on and relating to Dr. Fauci and relating to how it had cost the problems for millions upon millions of people. It has now come out. I'm going to play you that so you can understand that, how that has showed itself, and I'll play you the clips relating to that. And I think it's very, very important that you understand it. So it's a long clip, but I want you to understand how we were right, but we were told that we were wrong. So you will see in the long clip, you'll see how Tulsi Gabbard explains, and yeah, I should say, the Director of National Security in the United States, National Intelligence in the United States, basically is the overarching controller of all of the US's intelligence and security agencies. So the NSA, the CIA, the DIA, the interspatial areas, etc., 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 even the FBI, they, in effect, come under the Director of National Intelligence, and she gets to see all of the information and then can look at where she sees this, where she sees connections from all of these 19 US intelligence and security agencies, and then can collect together all this information and generally pass it to the President of the United States. So you can understand the powerful position that is in, and she is the one who is articulating the position about Dr. Fauci.
Today, on my final day as Director of National Intelligence, I'm releasing never-before-seen communications and documents that expose exactly how Fauci worked with politicized career leadership in the intelligence community to suppress the truth about his actions, the virus's lab leak origins, and his role in directing U.S. funding for this dangerous research that caused immeasurable harm and countless lost lives. First, Dr. Fauci funded dangerous gain-of-function coronavirus research linked to Big Pharma and their pursuit of universal vaccines worth trillions of dollars. Dr. Fauci became the nation's pandemic pundit, and he publicly pushed lies, disinformation, and censorship using every platform available. He promoted a fraudulent paper whose publication he helped prompt as legitimate information for intelligence community consideration. And we received statements from multiple whistleblowers revealing that the intelligence analysts who dared to challenge Dr. Fauci's COVID origin conclusions faced threats of retaliation, marginalization, and many suffered career setbacks. Before the COVID pandemic, Dr. Fauci, as head of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, provided millions in U.S. taxpayer dollars to fund dangerous gain-of-function research on bat coronaviruses at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, work which is now widely viewed as the source of the unintentional lab leak that sparked the pandemic. Now, in support of President Trump's maximum transparency mandate, today, on my final day as Director of National Intelligence, I'm releasing never-before-seen communications and documents that expose exactly how Fauci worked with politicized career leadership in the intelligence community to suppress the truth about his actions, the virus's lab leak origins, and his role in directing U.S. funding for this dangerous research that caused immeasurable harm and countless lost lives. Now, these documents expose Fauci's direct role in influencing and manipulating IC assessments on COVID-19 and how Fauci lied to Congress in 2024 when under oath he denied knowledge of or participation in discussions with intelligence officials about viral research. We also received testimony from multiple intelligence community whistleblowers who reported retaliation for challenging the intelligence community's manipulation of intelligence on the virus's origins, once again revealing a clear pattern of suppressing dissent, silencing critics, and burying the truth. Dr. Fauci's close relationships with the intelligence community enabled him to assume three key roles that shield him from scrutiny. First, Dr. Fauci funded dangerous gain-of-function coronavirus research linked to Big Pharma and their pursuit of universal vaccines worth trillions of dollars. Second, Dr. Fauci was the behind-the-scenes advisor who, alongside his hand-picked so-called experts, pushed the intelligence community to endorse a natural animal origin to hide his dangerous gain-of-function research that he funded using taxpayer dollars, all of this in a deliberate attempt to cover up the truth and shift the blame and attention away from Fauci's own actions. Third, Dr. Fauci became the nation's pandemic pundit, and he publicly pushed lies, disinformation, and censorship using every platform available. Now, according to hundreds of reviewed emails, which are included in this release, the intelligence community almost always incorporated Fauci's recommendations. He promoted a fraudulent paper whose publication he helped prompt as legitimate information for intelligence community consideration. Senior analysts praised Dr. Fauci not as a policymaker, but as what they called an unbiased guide to the real coronavirus experts, while deliberately ignoring experts who might dissent from Fauci's narratives. Now, Fauci didn't stop there. He blatantly lied to Congress under oath during his 2024 testimony to the House Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Pandemic, denying that he ever spoke to any intelligence agency about COVID. Now, the correspondence I'm releasing today directly contradicts his sworn testimony. And we received statements from multiple whistleblowers revealing that the intelligence analysts who dared to challenge Dr. Fauci's COVID origin conclusions faced threats of retaliation, marginalization, and many suffered career setbacks. For example, a contractor was terminated just days after coming forward to ODNI as a whistleblower. Another example, those who advocated for the lab leak hypothesis or expressed dissenting views were reminded by their managers that leadership would determine which analysts would be promoted and which would not. The message was clear: go along or be punished. Senior leaders also sought to undermine whistleblowers by removing anonymity, which is required in the whistleblower process, as they made their complaints, and also insisting that their managers or attorneys be present during ODNI meetings where these whistleblowers were coming forward with their testimony, obviously creating an atmosphere of intimidation. The COVID pandemic caused tremendous hardship and pain for millions of our fellow Americans and countless people around the world. Now, after years of lies and censorship and cover-ups, the American people deserve transparency, truth, and accountability. The tactics that were used to hide the truth are straight from the deep state playbook. Politicized self-serving leaders like Dr. Fauci covered up their own wrongdoing and abuses of power, manipulated intelligence, lied to Congress, and undermined a duly elected president by restricting his access to the vital facts he needed to keep the country safe. It's time you know the truth.
So that was another tick, if you will, in our vindication episode, whereby somebody's explaining to in a very, very high position in the United States government what actually happened and what we stipulated was the case, if you will, some years ago when we brought out our episode relating to that. And obviously go back and listen to the episode. Additionally, I want to have a look at some other episodes that we have obviously put forward as well, but I'll do them quite quickly due to the fact of time. I think there's going to be quite a long episode, but I'm going to keep it as one. But the reasoning is because I want to get it all together. Obviously, there's hundreds of occasions where we've been right, and where we're now hopefully being vindicated for our positions, when individuals have in the past said, this is nonsense, you've made it up, it's not true, it's conspiracy theories, etc., etc. Hopefully what you listen to now gives you an understanding that they're not conspiracy theories, not made up, but they're actual reality. Now, in the Black Spy podcast, we've taken a few hits from individuals for talking about the history, if you will, of the Ukraine conflict. It's very easy to talk about the Ukraine conflict from the time of the invasion of Russia into the Ukraine, as we start today, and nothing preceded it. What we've tended to do within the Black Spy podcast throughout is actually provide you with the history, provide you with the facts that neo-Nazism has been strong within the Ukraine, to explain to you my own personal knowledge regarding what I was told myself in Kyiv back in 2010, I think it was, by high-ranking official. So it's been something which we have looked into quite a bit, and we've given, I think, a down-the-line understanding of how the situation is. And we've also suggested that the way we're playing it in Europe is extremely dangerous for us in the United Kingdom and indeed throughout Europe. And I've also asked the question why we are doing it and why we are poking the bear and why we are putting ourselves at risk. Now, the next two aspects that I want to actually play for you, one is I'll play quite a short clip. It could be long, but I'm going to play it quite short then. It's about the latest actions of President Zelensky when he brought and provided uninterned and brought to being and provided full military honours for a former, basically, SS collaborator of the Second World War who was involved in the murder of 100,000 Poles at least, and probably as many, if you put it together, Russians, Soviets actually, be they Ukrainians or be they Russians, and also Jews, and additionally also clearly Roma and other individuals who were in the regions of what was said to be, or what was provided to Ukraine post the First World War, within its borders, within the Soviet Union, if you get what I'm saying. So, and if you go back to some of the histories that I've done, you'll see that we provide you with a history so you have an understanding about how the Ukraine was one of the 15 Soviet republics, and so you begin to get an understanding of that. But this clip that I'm going to play you now basically is how President Zelensky has done this and how it's upset the present Polish government.
Relations between Poland and Ukraine have nosedived following a diplomatic row over Kyiv naming a military unit after controversial World War II fighters. Poland's president says it amounts to the glorification of bandits and killers by Ukraine. So, can relations between the two neighbouring countries be restored? Brady, now, the Ukrainian insurgent army are regarded as heroes in many parts of Ukraine for their role in World War II. But in Poland, they're remembered for massacring 100,000 ethnic Poles in what is now Ukraine. President Zelensky's decision to name a military unit after them has been met with anger across Poland, and it could now jeopardise Polish support for Ukraine's defence.
Full state honours for Andrei Melnik, leader of the Organisation of Ukrainian Nationalists, ceremonially reburied after more than 70 years at the initiative of Ukrainian President Zelensky.
The Ukrainian people deserve their historical memory, and we are strengthening this true memory.
Just weeks later, Zelensky signed a decree to name a modern-day special forces unit after another wartime militia, the Ukrainian Insurgent Army.
we move up north to the Central Front, the defense of Moscow.
While some Ukrainian nationalists view these two groups as symbols of resistance and independence, many Poles associate them with the mass killings of Polish civilians and collaboration with Adolf Hitler's Nazi regime. That historical divide is now spilling into present-day politics, prompting sharp criticism from Polish leaders.
President Zelensky and the Ukrainians must be aware of what this gloomy legacy of the UPA means from the point of view of every Polish woman and man.
Polish President Karol Nawrocki is even considering stripping the Ukrainian president of one of Poland's highest honours, which he received in 2023.
Right, so because the programme which is orientating, which I've chosen, because I'm not, biased, is pro-Ukrainian, what you will see there is it is kind of trying to be down the line, but towards towards Ukraine. It never mentions in any way, shape or means as I've said to you, the deaths of other Soviet Ukrainians or Soviet Russians in the Soviet Union, that these units, which were SS units, which is not once even mentioned, that they were SS units of the German Wehrmacht, of the German army, not the Wehrmacht, the regular army, but of the German forces which had occupied that part of the Soviet Union, of which Ukraine was part of it, and as one of the republics, and then other Soviet republics like Belarus and obviously Russia itself, etc., had been occupied by those German forces. And it doesn't explain that these Ukrainian generally Western Ukrainian forces that believed in Ukraine not part of the Soviet Union, that they were totally and fully compliant with the principles of the German Reich, and particularly the Schutzstaffel, the SS. So, if you will, the most blatant of Nazis. And that's what these organisations were part of. It's not articulating that to you in the clip that I've just shown you. But I'm going to give you that understanding, as I have done in episodes, so you can understand where that's coming from. The next clip that I'm going to play you, which is much, much longer, and I think I'm going to play you in full, is from a programme known as Judge Napolitano. And on it is an individual who is a former British ambassador. So not some guy who, with a long career actually, in the ambassadorial service, which is a higher level service in the British Civil Service of the Foreign Office. And not some type of individual who is known for being bombastic or anti-British in any way, shape or means. But he's asking, like me, who is also not bombastic or anti-British in any way, shape or means, who spent 30 years serving the country, he's asking a question: why have we involved ourselves in a war that has nothing to do with us? And the war I'm talking about is the Ukraine. Why are we sending money to a kleptomaniac regime, of which half of the monies have been stolen? We know that from US investigations. And why are we also then giving these people weapons which we know are going to be used against Russia proper? And we have been told by the Russians, believe it or not, that we will pay for providing them with these weapons, which are attacking Moscow, which are attacking St. Petersburg, which are attacking general civilians in these major cities that are part of Russia. Why are we doing that? And why do we expect that nothing will come back to us as to what we're providing to them? And for you who don't know and haven't listened to previous programs, we've recently just provided the Ukrainians with 125,000 drones, and are meant to be providing them with another 125,000 drones. And it's these drones and our Storm Shadow missiles that are attacking Russia. and therefore the Russians say you are now a combatant in this war. And Ian Proud is going to speak to what I looked at 2 weeks previously, which was whether it was, Britons were worth dying for the Ukraine. And what I want to do is to let this ambassador explain to you his position as it relates to what I was talking about 2 weeks ago. And I think you'll find that there's not much room between me and my position from 2 weeks ago and ex-ambassador Ian Proud's position on where the United Kingdom sits, and the seeming lack of understanding of our present government under Starmer. And to be fair, you could even go back a little bit further to other governments who seem to have this Russophobic understanding of the former Soviet Union of Russia. And also, my argument was, Ian doesn't make this argument. My argument was that the reason why we may have taken this very strong stance, in addition to the government being Russophobic, so anti-Russian, in addition to that, is that because we lost Europe and therefore have lost import in the world, that we wanted to make up for that importance that we lost by trying to play a major role in combating Russia and aiding the Ukraine. So we show, this is Starmer, that our Prime Minister is important and therefore we're doing something in the world. We're not, if you will, a busted flush. Regular listeners to this programme will understand that what I have articulated for quite some time is that the United Kingdom needs to come to terms with what it is in the world today, not what it once was. We accept that it was once the most powerful nation in the world. But then so was ancient Egypt. So was Greece. Maybe not. Rome, for sure, at one stage. So was Iran for one stage. So was China. Right? Nations rise and nations fall. And the reality is where do you sit now? And I look at the Spanish and think they were at one stage the most powerful nation in the world. Yeah, I would argue that. And what happened is they realised that they needed to cut their cloth accordingly. We need to cut our cloth accordingly. British Prime Ministers should not pretend they are as important as they were back in the 1820s, 1880s, 1890s, 1910s, even after the First World War, 1920s. Yeah, and you could argue the last hurrah in the 1940s, coming up to the 1960s. We're not what we were. We have to come to terms with it. So listen to this.
Ian Proud will be with us in just a moment. Are the Russians thinking about bombing British munitions factories? Can you account from your position in Great Britain for the Kremlin's very tepid, or what appears to be tepid, response here in the United States to the Ukrainian attack on the girls' dormitory 2 or 3 weeks ago that killed 21 schoolgirls and rattled the Russian population?
Well, one of the things that people don't often talk about, certainly not in Western mainstream media, is the extent to which Putin has been acting with restraint, holding himself back from a much more significant escalation. The big question mark is whether there's a major offensive looming or whether there's a big escalation that Putin is planning at some point in the near future. It's certainly clear that he's coming under increasing pressure domestically to strike back hard and to kind of be less restrained than he has been so far.
A lot of people in the West imagine that he would never attack a NATO nation directly, even though CIA, MI6, maybe I'm putting it in the wrong order because the CIA thinks that the your guys, MI6 are more aggressive, have been directly involved in targeting Russian soldiers, Russian assets, including one of President Putin's home. Does the British government, let me restate this, is the British government wary of a potential response?
I think the British government is completely deluded, to be, quite frank. We've completely lost sight of what it is we're trying to achieve in Ukraine. Our army is a complete mess. We have as of today, we have 0 attack submarines because of the 6. They're all being fixed right now. Our military is a joke. The Defense Secretary has literally just resigned today because he can't get any more money or not enough money out of the government. And yet there are so many people everywhere calling for us to escalate and prepare for a war with Russia by 2030, 2029, maybe next week, Judge. I mean, we've completely lost touch with reality in this country, and ordinary people should be worried about this because we are slowly creeping towards a war that we are not prepared for in the United Kingdom.
I find this fascinating, and we'll get back to Russia in a minute. Is Sir Keir Starmer long for the job as Prime Minister?
The question is how many more nails have to go into his coffin before it's permanently shut? I mean, Healy has just resigned today. We have this by-election in Makerfield. I can't see him lasting past September, which is, I think, when the actual leadership contest will start after the summer break. I think he's got 3 months left in the job and job done. That's my view.
All right. So you think he'll lose his job, not because the Conservatives will win a general election, but because he'll lose leadership of the Labour Party?
Exactly. That's how our system works. There'll be a Caesar moment where somebody stabs him in the front on the steps of the Senate and they take over. And at the moment, it's odds on to be somebody called Andy Burnham if he wins this by-election. The big question is whether that really signals a shift in UK policy. I personally can't see that it will.
What does the UK think it can accomplish in Ukraine? Is it providing Ukraine with money? We know it's providing it with munitions because Sergei Lavrov himself has argued publicly that he's identified munitions made in British munitions factories, munitions that landed in Russia that were fired. I don't know if they're British contractors firing them or if the Ukrainians have been taught how to use British equipment. So where does the government think it's going? Are they just trying to please Donald Trump by making a small contribution to the Ukrainian war effort? Or is there some bigger game here?
This is not about Trump, Judge. This is a purely British virulent Russophobia. We can help Ukraine secure decisive victory against Russia. It really is that deluded. The Pink Panther cruise missiles, that was absolutely a joint venture with the United Kingdom. We've now heard we're going to help Ukraine. This is the UK make their version of the Patriot missile when we haven't actually invented it ourselves. Our defense industry is a joke. We can't produce anything on time. It's always over budget. So the whole thing is there's no logic to any of this, Judge. It's all complete delusion and a recognition that if the war ends, if we do diplomacy for a change after 12 years, we'll have to tell our public that we've been lying to them all this time when we said that Ukraine would win. So there's that political angle to it as well.
Back to President Putin. He must be under pressure from his own colleagues in the Kremlin, like the intelligence community, the military community, elites in Russia, the oligarchs who want the world to work again, and the Russian public, which has got to be tired of a war they thought would last for 6 months, is now in its 5th year.
Yeah, he is under intense pressure. He's under pressure to escalate, but he's also under pressure to end the war. And he can only end the war if there's actual diplomacy negotiation from the other side. Every time Western leaders have some sort of diplomatic initiative, on Ukraine, it never involves talking to Russia. I had a piece out in Responsible Statecraft today on this. These are very complicated matters. The Europeans have to step up, negotiate, and bring this to a close. Having continuous events where they get Zelensky along and everybody agrees with each other that Russia's bad and we're good isn't going to take us anywhere. So, but unfortunately, I see no real turning of the tide on the European side, that they still think we're winning, believe it or not.
Well, I mean, are the EU elites, by which I mean Starmer, Macron, Merz, von der Leyen, those characters in the European Union, Kaja Kallas, are they still preaching Russophobia? Do they still fear that the man who won't even bomb Kyiv might bomb Berlin or Warsaw or Paris?
They drink the Kool-Aid and the bottle's very large, Judge. I'm afraid they do. And you have to bear in mind that these are also deeply unpopular figures in their own country. Starmer is apparently the worst British Prime Minister on record, although, there's stiff competition, given recent candidates also include Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. Friedrich Merz apparently is deeply unpopular, 15% approval rating. Nobody voted von der Leyen into her job, and the Financial Times is reporting today that member states want to completely strip Kaja Kallas of her powers and reduce the role of the European Diplomatic Service. So none of these are kind of popular figures, and yet still they're driving forward this policy, particularly in Kallas's case, and also in the UK's case, driven by absolute rabid Russophobia and a fear of accepting that they've made a massive mistake and they've been lying all this time.
Can you, without violating a national security obligation that you may have from your status as a former diplomat, characterize for us what MI6 is doing in the war, Ukraine versus Russia?
But what I can say, and this is public record, you can look it up on government documents, after the Ukraine war started, government policy was centralized into a single unit in Whitehall. The joint head of that was not a diplomat, was an MI6 representative. All of the intelligence agencies, including GCHQ and MI6, this is all on public record, by the way, got a massive increase in their funding with one big target on the radar, and that was Russia. So, they've been given more control over the policy. Arguably, they have complete control over the policy. They've had more money. We know that, they have infiltrated media organizations. So they have a lot of influence over the mainstream media as well in terms of what they're reporting, so they don't stray off track. The sort of deep state, if you want to call it that, which includes intelligence agencies, has a chokehold on power. And with ministers being so bad and changing all the time, unfortunately, that power, it can't be eroded by sort of the democratic people in charge who come along every year or so and do as they're told.
Well, if I stood outside of Parliament, somewhere near the famous statue of Winston Churchill, and got on a soapbox and called for a Palestinian state, would I be arrested for my speech?
You might well be, particularly if you're associated with somebody else who's a member of the Palestine Action Group, which is a prohibited organization in the United Kingdom. There are viral videos of elderly, frail people going to Palestine Action protests in the centre of London, doing nothing at all that threatens the police, harmless grannies and granddads, getting escorted away by burly police officers under arrest. So please, Judge, please don't do that, because I would hate to see a man of your...
They might not let me in at the airport, who knows, but I ask you this because, our tradition of free speech supposedly comes from Great Britain, but I could stand right outside of the building I'm in now and get on a soapbox and call for a Palestinian state, and nobody would pay attention. It's New York. They're more concerned about the basketball team, the Knicks. I understand that. I get that. It's sort of a fever that we're all susceptible to right now, and it's actually very unifying. But the last thing on my mind would be fear of arrest because of political speech. Okay. Is there fear of reprisal in Great Britain for what MI6 and what the arms manufacturers are doing for Ukraine, or do they believe that Vladimir Putin wouldn't dare attack a NATO country?
I don't think there is. I mean, I think that they just don't believe it's going to happen. And if I'm being completely honest, my assessment is that actually Putin wouldn't strike first inside of a NATO country. However, I think live fire between NATO and Russian forces will actually happen in international waters, Judge. I mean, that I'm telling you now, that's where it's going to happen, on the high seas. When a French helicopter tries to land on a Russian tanker and sees it, increasingly the Russian Navy is escorting oil tankers through international waters. That is where a live fire is going to happen. And it could happen any time now, because just in the past week, the Europeans have said, well, we're going to seize any kind of Russian tanker that we want. That is where the actual fire will start on the high seas, Judge.
Are the Europeans, and in particular the British, involved in any way in Israel's and America's war on Iran?
Indirectly, through supporting the sort of Gulf states, providing defensive capabilities to the Gulf states. Briefly, we had an attack submarine, in the kind of theatre, but not directly involved. Well, I mean, indirectly by doing a big U-turn and letting the United States use our air bases in Fairford and Diego Garcia, of course, indirectly, but not directly in terms of live fire into Iran itself, as far as I'm aware. There will have been some intelligence sharing, but largely, we see our role, or not me, but the government is providing some sort of defensive shield to the kind of Gulf states. I think that's the biggest
Does the British government permit British munitions manufacturers to sell arms to Israel? And if so, do they sell arms to Israel? Or does the British government pay for them and then give them to Israel?
Yes, they do. Of course they do, Judge. I mean, the F-35 contract, for example, the F-35 contract is a consortium. And actually, in an official government response to a question several times over the last year, when put under pressure to not sell British-made F-35 parts to Israel, the government reply was, well, we're in this consortium. We are legally bound. We can't just come out of this consortium. We're part of the F-35 program. So yes, that, other examples, we do provide directly or indirectly munitions to the Israeli state.
If the American Secretary of Defense, who calls himself the Secretary of War, were to resign, it would be a big deal here. Is it a big deal in Britain when the defense minister resigns?
Well, no, because our military is pathetic, sadly. and my dad was in the British Army. It fills me with shame that we've fallen to this. Judge, our army hasn't been this small since 1823. Wow. It's a joke. We have no attack submarines. So no, I mean, people are only paying attention to it really because they're starting to think, is this another nail in Starmer's coffin? I mean, that is how it's going to play, more than the fact that we have no money to spend a great deal more on defence. And even if we did, it would take us a decade to even start to recover from the terrible position we find ourselves in today. But hey-ho, we're getting ready to fight Russia in 2 years.
Wow.
So there you have it. That was Ian Stroud speaking about how his experience as an ambassador, one of the leading lights in British officialdom around the world, which is what ambassadors are, who represent us around the world, what he thinks of the present situation and our government. Now, the reality is that very few people ever speak out. This is why we on the podcast are relatively unique in terms of, my role in the Metropolitan Police Special Branch, a political police, and my role in the Secret Intelligence Service, MI6, as a case officer. and speaking out always, as you noted Ian did too, with a certain amount of extremely healthy reluctance to say anything that could in any way, shape or means be construed as me providing, as you saw Ian, not providing anything that could suggest that we were, if you will, providing to listeners something that was still secret. So what you're getting is from me and from anybody who's been in the particular role that I have, as I said, be it in the National Public Order Intelligence Unit, be it in Special Branch, be it in MI6, what you're getting from us is a position of, let's first check, make sure the information has been put in some way, shape or means in the public domain. And often, even though it's in the public domain, the average member of the British public will not have heard it. Because what tends to happen is, if there's something that government thinks the people have a right to know, which is actually really practically everything, but that's not what they provide you, the public, but they tend to push it out in a way that the very, very least people will see it. They tend to push it out on days when there are other things of import which will take the people's interest. And that could be from the marriage of some celebrity to a football match that's of great import. They'll throw it out there so you actually don't see it, first and foremost, probably because the newspapers or the mass media won't feature it because it has little room to get out, and otherwise because they bury it somewhere that you're never going to see it or read it. So I hopefully allow you to understand what goes on in your country from the perspective of somebody who's providing you this generally open source intelligence, which means it's been in the public domain, and just articulating that to you in a manner that you can look it up for yourself, think about it, and understand, where we sit as a nation, where you probably sit or should sit as an individual, or where you think you should sit. I'm not telling anybody where they should sit as an individual in terms of their political understanding, their political perspective, their political means. I'm just going to stop people from being scapegoated for things that's not their fault. Top of my head, the boats. If you look at the boats and then you actually looked at the percentage of immigration that the boats represent, you'd see that it's a factor of 0 point whatever, right? It really doesn't represent anything of any great note, of any great size. It's just that, obviously, if governments can scapegoat others for their own problems, they do it. The danger is in scapegoating others for their problems. However, and it's a very, very important factor, is that in doing that, you can lead to the situation like we presently have in Belfast, where because the government has actually articulated this as a big problem, and because an individual does something which, frankly, in Belfast isn't overly, let us argue that in Belfast, a part of our nation whereby scores have been settled on many occasions by kneecapping, by shooting people in the back of their head. You can go on and on and on. When a person does that who is perceived not to be part of the society, then all of a sudden it's a reason to burn out their nurses who happen to not be the same colour of them, and other medical staff or other people who perform a great role within that society, just because they don't look like them. Okay, that's basically it. But the problem is that government has already, in many ways, created this position by scapegoating individuals to take the attention away from their own problems. And it's something that will not change. So, ladies and gentlemen, what I want to just finish with is to say that, and I could go on and show you many, many other issues and points where we've been bang on with our analysis, such as, let's say, the police and how the British media has undermined the police to such a level that most police forces, particularly the Met, are finding it extremely difficult to recruit because people don't want to join. And also, not only, which is a double whammy, do they not wish to recruit, we're finding individuals leaving the police, and large numbers, basically with 5 years in, 6 years in, something that never happened previously. People who joined the police as a general rule stayed in for the whole of the 30 years and did their service. Now you'll find them just leaving. So what I'm saying is that in many of the areas that we have looked at throughout the time we've been on the Black Spy podcast, I've not even touched on the male menopause. I've not touched on the gender battles within the United Kingdom. I've not touched on the every man for themselves perspective, which we find in the UK, which undermines our unified system and which brings rise to people like Tommy Robinson, who then utilise this with the assistance of very wealthy American donors who have their own white supremacist perspectives, and also additionally, folk like Nigel Farage, and indeed governments in all parts of government. I don't care if it's Labour, Conservative, doesn't make any difference, who has spun to the right in order to, if you will, not be left behind, but have not challenged this perspective. Indeed, have done the opposite. They've gone along with it and talked about the bolts and all this sort of nonsense, when actually the bolts are an infinitesimal number, if you will, of individuals entering the United Kingdom, as opposed to actual immigration, which, as I explained earlier on in the Brexit segment, has been required. If you only need to look at agriculture and say, well, we've got stuff rotting in the fields now because we can't get individuals to pick the fruit that we have, or the tomatoes, or whatever it might be, because it's too much like hard work and Britons don't want to do the job. So there we've got these areas that we could have looked at, we haven't, just because of time. I just wanted to give you a feel that when we do bring something out to you, be it medical, be it political, be it media, we have researched it. And myself, Dr Rchel, Firgas Esack from the media, Phil, the inspector, I could go on and on and on. In technology, we've actually brought out various technological individuals on the Black Spy podcast who spoke to you about where technology is going, Matthew and others. We do this because we understand that we're providing to you a service that you actually don't get anywhere else, really. So thank you very much for listening to today. This was Vindication, and hopefully you'll understand why we named it that. See you later.
Here is a working class spy telling his stories, the secrets, the lives of spies. Feel free to message Carlton King on all socials and give this show 5 stars on Apple iTunes, and subscribe so you never miss a single episode, for your ears only.
I was a member of Her Majesty's Secret Intelligence Service.